lot of people. So when when you see the coolie that's mentioned in the story, he's an example of some of these low-waged Indian workers that are coming in that have no respect in their own society. The British don't respect them, and the Burmese hate them. And so this coolie's death is one of the more dehumanizing aspects, the way they treat it. But it's again, this is part of that understanding the setting, what's going on at the time that would have someone have that reaction. And that's just, his place in society is, really, really low. Okay. So Orwell, by the time Orwell gets there in 1922, Britain has been there for quite a while. But the Burmese are still engaging in what we might call guerrilla warfare, right? They cannot directly and outright they can't outright fight against the British, so they have to do a lot of indirect kind of fighting. And so that kind of explains why, Orwell says it's kind of petty and aimless, the cheap shots that the Burmese take against the Europeans. But, what else can they do? They do not have the right to have any kind of weapons. Right? So they are very vulnerable and defenseless, which is why Orwell has to take care of the elephant. None of them are allowed access to any kind of weapon that could take this rogue elephant down. They don't have the right to vote. They don't have the right to their own religion. Britain is taking all of the profits. So a country that actually, when the monarchy was there, they kind of had a little bit more of a socialist kind of structure, that the wealth was redistributed to everyone, so everyone had a decent living, right? All of a sudden, they're in extreme poverty because of this. And these monks have a whole lot of time on their hands because their roles have been kind of destroyed, right? They're not active, they're not teaching, they're not doing all these things. So they're just kind of standing around, and it makes sense that they would then maybe militarize or organize. And in fact, later on, after Orwell leaves, we're going to see that the Buddhist monks are part of this great national movement that eventually gains Burma its independence again, right? So, and a lot of other factors, but they actually do kind of really band together in an official way. So that's what's going on there. So let's think about Orwell. So Orwell actually was born in Burma. His parents are British, so he's not Burmese in any way, right? But his parents were civil servants, or his mother was the daughter of a civil servant there. They met, they married. But when he was 4, they moved back to Britain. And so he has some connection to Burma. He's got some relatives out there in the British, colonial aspects. But, he doesn't speak the language. He doesn't really know anything about it. So when he gets out of high school, he starts thinking about college, but college just does not work out for him. He doesn't like it. He's not doing well. So he decides to join the Indian Imperial Police, right? And he requests Burma because he's got relatives, right? This is where his parents met and all that. So in 1922, that's where he's sent out there. He isn't given a whole lot of training. I think I read in one article that maybe he got like 6 weeks worth of training. And at 19, he is put in charge of a territory that has 300,000 Burmese, right? And so this is the situation that he's in. By 1927, he comes home on vacation or a break, and he basically decides to resign. He is at that point an assistant superintendent or something, so he's actually been promoted. He seems to be doing well. And when he sends in his resignation, the Imperial Police are like really surprised, and they're a little bit PO'd at him because they think we've invested all this time. We had no indication that he was unhappy, right? All of a sudden he just resigns. This kind of, I think, is telling when we think about all the times in the story that he talks about not being able to express his unhappiness, not being able to ask for help. I mean, why would they know that he was unhappy if his impression, at least, is that he's not supposed to talk about how he's feeling about things, right? If you've ever read Orwell in high school, you probably read Animal Farm or 1984. And I think what you're going to see is the genesis of those works is here in Burma. That when he sees imperialism, the fascist nature of it, and then later on in 1936, he goes and he fights against the fascism in Spain in the Civil War. He makes it his life's work to speak out against these things. So I think it's very interesting in this story, he is silenced. He is oppressed by this imperialism and by his own perhaps prejudices. And the effect that it has on him is actually then he starts writing about it. He changes his name to George Orwell to protect his family, he says, because he knows how volatile what he's saying is. If you think about the novel Burmese Nights and this story were published in about 1929, right? 2 years after he left Burma. You think about 1929 in Europe. That's on the verge of World War II. You have the rise of fascism and nationalism. In Britain, the empire is crumbling, right? They're having a lot more challenges. They've come out of World War One, where so many men were killed. It was a very disheartening kind of war, the kind of cruelty and extreme millions and millions of people killed in ways that were never seen before in a major war. Britain is really struggling to maintain that British superiority and that sense of identity. And so here he's writing this novel, Burmese Nights, and then this story, Shooting an Elephant, that is highly critical and again in the story he calls it evil what they're doing. That's pretty courageous. So even though he is fairly cowardly, I think in this story you can see the consequences of it, that he didn't just slink away. He decided to fight the battle in a different way. And again, the influence he's had on society has been quite incredible because of that, right? So again, the rest of this, you can read this and you can see, again, here, one of the things they say here is this idea about saving face is an important theme. You might want to talk about that. Okay? All right. And if you cite anything in your essay from this part, or anything from one of these sidebars, like if you want to use a definition or something like that, then you will use the works cited right here by Janet Allen, because any of those sidebar comments or anything on this last 2 pages, that's what the editor of this book wrote, right? However, if you're citing anything in the story that's right here in this part, that's Orwell, and you'll see right here, this is the works cited entry for that. Okay? All right, so let's just talk about then the story.